Hello and welcome to the About to Interview podcast. I'm your host, that guy named John. This is a supplemental version of the About to Review podcast, which drops every Wednesday and covers movies, TV shows, film festivals, and more. You can follow the podcast on all forms of social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at About to Review, and make sure to subscribe on iTunes/Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Blueberry, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. This show focuses solely on the conversations that I have with authors, directors, actors, and creators, and is available on YouTube as well as subscribing to the podcast. Make sure to click the subscribe button below, give a thumbs up, and check out the full show notes with links to the guests at abouttoreview.com.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Yeah! Let's all go to the lobby. Yeah! Let's all go to the lobby. Yeah! Let's all go to the lobby. Yeah! Let's all go to the lobby.
From the streets of Gotham City, Central City, New York City, and even Westeros, I'm sitting with an author who has written tales taking place in all of those different places and times. Welcome to the show, Landry Walker.
Hello.
How are things?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I liked that when I started my intro, because I did not even tell you what the intro is going to be. The look on your face was like, all right, where is this going? What is happening?
I love that you got Westeros in there. I had to think for me. Okay, no, I see where he's going. All right.
Yeah, you were picking it up as I was going, but there was definitely that moment of, all right, this guy who I agreed to be on an interview show with, not sure what he is doing.
It was good. It was good.
Nice. But yeah, I mean, you have been in the business for a while. And like I said, you have written stuff for Batman Brave and the Bold, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I mean, all of these sorts of things, and including, of course, some of the Westeros or some of the Game of Thrones comic books.
Yeah. I've gotten the pleasure of adapting second book in the Song of Ice and Fire, Clash of Kings, into comic book format, which has been a really, really weird and fun job because I'm not writing it, but I am completely deconstructing it and reconstructing it into a different form, which means sort of rewriting it. It's weird.
Right. Now, what is the added pressure of that when you take somebody like George R.R. Martin that is regarded as a pretty good writer, he kind of knows what he is doing, and then they're like, all right, we need you to take that, and we like it, give us your spin.
Well, because one of the main thrusts of the job is to preserve George's writing in it the closest we can in a comics form, doing as much of a 1-1 sort of translation as is possible, as opposed to, say, the TV show, which takes more liberty by necessity. These are different mediums, and we have to take liberties too. The one of the main things we look at a lot with this is how much do we show versus how much do we tell. The novel is, it's all tell. Everything is tell. Right. In the book, there's a lot of scenes where you can tell with pictures. And so where do we cut text from? It's fun. I don't know that there's a lot of pressure because it's really just an enjoyable job.
Nice.
It's kind of like one of the funnest parts of writing comics for me is getting into the construction of a page, because I write full script. So it's all page 1, panel 1 with detailed description, and then the dialogue, panel 2, detailed description, with suggestions and notes of like, okay, let's compose this one as a wide image, pull in tight on the eyes. It's a lot more direction than it is writing in a way. And it's fun. It's kind of the pure science of experimenting with the pure science of panel construction within comics, which is the language of comics. I really, really enjoy the job. And I'm working with some great people on it. I'm working with Anne, who is the editor on the book series and has been since the 90s. and Rhea, who works directly with George, and of course the people at Dynamite. So yeah, it's fun job.
Nice. So the main reason that, I mean, because we could talk about all of your other things, and I'm sure we will.
Yeah, sorry, I'll go on instantly.
Oh, no, that is totally... When you are as busy as you are, totally understandable. The book that I just recently got of yours by the amazing people at DK, who anytime they come out with a new superhero book or an encyclopedia or an ultimate guide, they sent me an email and they're like, hey, John, you want a copy of this and to review and talk to the author? And I'm like, just stop sending me the question of asking me. Just be like, hey, we are sending you a book, and here is the guide, because of course I'm going to say yes. So the book that you recently did for DK is Justice League, The Ultimate Guide.
Yes, that is one of the books I recently did from, because I also did just before that, I did the Wonder Woman Ultimate Guide, too.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, hold on, I've got... Not that anyone can see it, but
right.
I've got right here the Justice League book I have on hand.
Oh, look at that. I have it right in front of me, too. Amazing how that works out.
Yeah, that was this book was a lot of fun to write.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, again, it's a different process. I began in the industry working in underground comics back in the early 90s. But I was always a DC kid. I was a superhero fan. Maybe when you post this, I'll share a photo of me at 5 years old with Burt Ward in full costume. He's in full Robin costume.
Yes, please.
He used to do in the 70s. Yeah, there's a picture of me with Burt Ward. By the time I was 4, I was a diehard Batman fan. The Super Friends was airing. It was new at the time. The whole Legion of Doom,
right?
And era. The comics were a natural step for me at that point, and I was picking up a lot of the 1970s Justice League sort of stuff, like the oh god, let me think. When was I'm trying to remember what the first. I actually in this book ended up highlighting a few of my personal firsts and favorites with the Justice League, like the them fighting the Royal Flush Gang during the Satellite era, them battling Starro on the faces of everyone on the cover. I think it was the first time that had happened, the Starro face thing, I think, as I recall. I was able to highlight a lot of my personal favorites in this book, a lot of stories that were meaningful to me, while at the same time trying to service the larger history.
For sure, and that was something that I really enjoyed with the book, because, I mean, I have a massive comic book collection, and, always looking for those rare things, those other things to kind of add, as opposed to subscribing to 60 books a month, like I used to do, which was madness.
Yeah.
Then it became more, okay, what are the things I'm really looking forward to? What are the things that I really want to dig and find? So I like in the book how, whether it was a decision of yours or it was already there, how it will have like those key issues, and then it will talk about them. It will say what comic it was from, the issue number, the year, talk about the comic, who is in it, and it really kind of lays it out. That way somebody who maybe is picking this book up for the first time reading about Justice League after seeing the new movie, they can be like, okay, some of these characters sound familiar. Where did they come from? What was an important storyline? So I really liked that you structured it that way. Was that an idea of yours, or was that something that you kind of helped move forward?
That was one of the bits of structure that came along with the job. One of the nice things about the DK books is that if you pick one up, each book kind of works within the same framework of another, by and large, like using a lot of let's do a key storyline, let's do a key issue. So there's a certain list of types of spreads they were already working with when they first approached me about working on the Wonder Woman book. And then there were some elements that I brought in. The key issue was one they had pre-existing that I was really happy to work with, actually. Especially, it becomes more difficult to do a key issue when you get past about 1990. because all the storylines start becoming multi-part.
Yeah.
So here's a key issue, but you really have to know, like, 5 issues before and 5 issues after to understand why this is key.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real nice aspect of working with a key issue in the 60s, because you're looking at, let's say issue 7 or 8, I forget which one it is, that is the first telling of the origin of the Justice League, where they're all getting turned into trees by the aliens invading.
Mm-hmm.
And
the Appalachians, I found.
Yeah.
Yeah, uh-huh.
I never know how to pronounce that. That's what I love about print. You don't actually have to know how to pronounce these things.
Right. I talk about that frequently with books like Harry Potter. I know people that were reading that when they saw Hermione's name. That was just one you just started to look over. Just as you're reading, you're like, Hermione. Yeah, sure. And then they saw it, saw the movie, and they're like, Hermione. Gotcha.
The Watchmen had a lot of that with, how do you pronounce it? Ozymandias?
Right.
Yes. Yep. Everyone I knew when that book was coming out, when it was new, everyone I knew pronounced it differently.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, there's historical context for that, we were all 13, 14 years old at the time. None of us knew it.
Right.
So
the Appalachians, and that type of cover.
Well, just being able to do those single issues, those key issues, and when you're dealing with, anywhere from the 40s on through the up until about the 90s, key issue is a lot easier to focus on. After that, it becomes more difficult, and the key storyline became something I enjoyed more at that stage, because then you're just doing an overall, like, here's the entire tale of that time Darkseid came to New York for a Subway sandwich.
Right.
Which turned out to be a 40-issue multi-arc, and included 5 reboots of the universe. Actually, I want to write that now. I
was just going to say, I'm pretty sure that might be in the deleted chapters of the book.
So one of the things that I brought with me to the DK books, though, was I pushed to make the eras more significantly filled out. I noticed in some of the earlier books, you might look at the Silver Age, and there wasn't a lot of material compared to, say, the Modern Age. There'd be like 30 pages here and 5 pages there. And I felt that each, this is the ultimate guide. You need to know equally about the 60s version of the Justice League as you do the 70s, as you do the 80s, and so on and so forth. I didn't want to do a book that just serviced who the Justice League is now with a lens looking at their history retroactively from today's perspective. I wanted to give it a perspective starting each era from that era. And that was really important to me with both the books I did with DK.
And that was what was also impressive is, so growing up when I was reading, comics in the 80s and 90s, when you had the Justice League Europe and you had the Justice League International, Justice League Detroit, some of those teams might not have been the greatest, but the fact that
they said Justice League Antarctic was not the greatest ever.
Okay, Justice League Antarctic, that whole storyline, I was like, what are you doing? Like, I remember seeing that. This was back when newsstands would carry comics.
Right.
And I remember going there and seeing that after picking up Superman, Batman, and by their titles, and being like, really? Is this happening? Okay, sure.
Right.
So I like that in the book, you did not, ignore those. Those are part of the lore. Those are part of the history. We would not have some of the storylines that actually end up being really fun if not for some of those storylines or teams that maybe are not the greatest or have the biggest heavy hitters.
The funny thing is, I look at, like, especially looking some of the impact some of this stuff has had retroactively. The Detroit League, for an example, at the time, again, because I'm a little older than you, I had the perspective of the fandom really rebelling against that series at the time. One, you go back and read it, and there were some very strong stories in there, especially in the later issues. And two, the impact we've seen that continue to have on other media. I mean, you watch the Legends of Tomorrow show,
yeah,
and the Flash and all those. I mean, half of that stuff doesn't exist without the Justice League Detroit of all things. I mean,
yeah,
that's where they put together Vixen, Gypsy, Vibe, Steel. It's like they have mined the hell out of that. That is like they've done their job, their homework. And without those stories, we don't have the stories we're getting now that people are getting into, and all these really amazing characters that people are finding representation with. So
Yeah.
they may not have been executed great back then, but at least the ideas were there.
For sure. I mean, I remember picking up issues of Justice League Europe, with Elongated Man. And it was like,
Oh yeah.
okay, like Ralph Dibny, cool. Pretty sure Plastic Man is right around the corner. But again, those storylines, they served a purpose. Even if it was just, at that point, right now we're kind of just inundated and we are spoiled, frankly, that we have so many things going on. But back then, when a new Justice League title came out, that was new. That it was fresh. It was like, wait, a new team with new characters, new adventures. Why would we not do this? And granted, there is always going to be that part of fandom that wants to rebel against it because it is not their Justice League. To you, what defines your Justice League?
Well, I mean, there's two things. There's two perspectives there. There's a fan perspective and the professional perspective. I mean, within me, there are two perspectives. Because in this day and age, you're rarely going to find a professional who isn't also a fan.
Right.
But I think it's important to have two very distinct views of that. So, for me, this is tough. Like, my childhood definitive Justice League, when I think of the Justice League, is the Satellite era with, about the time Zatanna was in there with her big, long blue and white curtain-like costume, which I loved. Martian Manhunter was just kind of coming back into the mix. Firestorm. But, of course, you still had Batman, Superman, Aquaman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, these key players. So it was kind of a golden age at that time of, like, all the originals with all these really exciting newer characters as well. My favorite, that's probably my, that's what I think of, because I was like 6-7 years old when I was exposed to that. That becomes ingrained. That said, my favorite is probably Justice League International, the earlier issues especially.
Wow, okay.
The, Giffen, DeMatteis, Maguire. I mean, the material is hysterical. I am a huge fan of any of the Charlton characters, like Blue Beetle.
Yes.
Captain Atom. I actually got into those characters. My grandmother bought me a stack of comics from the thrift store in the 70s, and they were old Charlton stuff, before DC owned them. So I was reading the 60s Ditko Blue Beetle stuff with the Question, Captain Atom, a lot of the Thunderbolt was in there, Peter Cannon Thunderbolt, who did not stick around the DC universe for legal reasons.
Right.
So seeing those characters come to the DC universe in Crisis, I was like, oh my god, it's the Blue Beetle in DC! And so, I love the humor. Everyone talks about Watchmen, is what if superheroes were real? And I look at Justice League International as probably the much better version of what if superheroes were real. I love Watchmen, don't get me wrong, but if superheroes were real, they'd be complaining about, like, where their costumes are riding up or who didn't wash the dishes. Because in the end, they're just people, just like we're people, and they act like we do, only they happen to be in costumes and in high-stress situations.
Well, especially, I mean, coming off of that, then you had those great and hilarious blue and gold runs with Booster Gold and Blue Beetle that are just amazing when you look at just how absurd they were, but also how true to the characters they were, because they're, like you said, they were real people. They were just people following in the footsteps. I mean, granted, Blue Beetle, Ted Kord, and all of that. With Booster Gold, it was like, I found some tech and allowed me to go back in time, so I'm going to pretend to do this. So he was just a dude. And so having a team of people where that was just what they were led to some interesting storylines.
Oh, yeah. So then there's the professional perspective. From a professional perspective, probably the Grant Morrison era of the Justice League, I feel, is where we get some of the strongest stories. the epic level of, these people are dealing with things. It's not just how, like, how do I put it? There is a level of absurdity in those stories, a Silver Age absurdity, at the same time putting incredibly, devastatingly massive real-world stakes, combining Silver Age absurdity with impossibly dire situations adds to this great dramatic tension where you're suddenly taking flying starfish or whatever very seriously. That's what is so well done in those books. So there's, I think professionally, I think that's where we see the kind of the peak of the Justice League. I enjoy it most as a fan with the Justice League International 80s, and what I think of most with the Justice League is the Justice League is the 70s. But so multiple opinions. In long explanation to your very quick question, I have multiple answers to that.
Okay.
Which served this book well because I explored all of them.
You really were able to do that, and the book is, it is amazing. It actually came out, I think it was coming out during the week of New York City Comic Con.
Yeah.
And so I saw it in person and was talking to the DK rep, and I was like, so, can I go to this? She was like, not yet. Just go away. And I was like, all right, fine. So I
should have come to signing. I did signings there.
New York City Comic Con, we talked about it briefly before we started recording. New York City Comic Con, I had an absolute blast, but that place is madness.
Oh yeah, no, it's insane. Though, if anything, it's more mellow than it was several years ago.
What?
I went to the first. Oh yeah, I was there. It was the first or second year where the fire department shut things down, where they wouldn't let anyone in or out, or let anyone in anyway. And
in or out, they're like, no, everyone stays in.
I think it was just in. I think it was just no one could come in. But you had parents cut off from their children. I thought there was going to be a riot outside.
Oh,
I mean, it was insane. The crowd level, and the way they determine this at conventions is they're checking the CO2 in the air and determining is it reaching an unsafe level, which is terrifying. When you think about it, I go to so many of these shows. I'm like, oh God.
Are we just going to run out of oxygen, or is it going to become toxic?
Yeah, I don't know. I know it's bad. I mean,
wow.
So, yeah, I don't want to have that. They almost did it at San Diego right around the same time, and then San Diego started putting more of a cap on their attendance because it was just growing, and they went, whoa, okay, let's pull it back a little.
Right.
Conventions are fun, but there was a time... I think I went to my first San Diego Comic-Con, which has an audience now of about, 160,000?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. I went to my first one in 92. I think it was 92.
Was that when it was at the hotel back then?
It was literally just after the convention had moved, and it was, what was it? We drove that night. We drove down that night. I was with an artist I still work with named Eric Jones, and two of our friends, Pennell Vaughn, who's a colorist, and another friend who's not in the industry. So Eric and I were in the back of a pickup truck for this drive. We drove down, we arrived, we pulled up next to the convention Thursday morning. We parked. You could just park right there. We walked up, bought tickets, and we went in. It was a simpler time. And we thought it was insane. We thought it was giant. It had an attendance of about 30,000 that year. And I was like, oh my God, so many people.
Right.
But contextually, that was bonkers. That did not happen.
And you were also planning on coming up to Emerald City Comic Con here in just a few months.
Yes, I will definitely be there. I've got a Artist Alley table, I believe, set up. I will. I don't have it set up right now. That'd be weird.
Right. Very in advance,
Yeah, no, it's a very lonely wait. Yeah, no, I'll be there. With some old books and some new books.
Nice. One of the other things that you have worked on, speaking of some of your old stuff and new stuff, is a lot of what you have focused on professionally are these all ages style books. Like The Incredibles, Batman the Brave and the Bold, which, again, we talked about the kind of 70s ridiculousness of things. I loved the animated series Batman Brave and the Bold because it was fun. And so the comic had that same style where it It was absurd. It was off the wall, but also amazing.
We had a lot of fun with that. I was working with artist Eric Jones. We had just finished our run of Supergirl, Cosmic Adventures in the 8th grade. And as I was coming to a close, we were putting together a pitch for an all-ages Batman series we want to do. Now, the TV show, the cartoon, Batman Brave and the Bold, hadn't been announced yet.
Mm-hmm.
And we put together this whole pitch. We went down to San Diego. We were going to show it to some of our editors. We get there, and there's these big banners or something advertising Batman Brave and the Bold. We're like, okay, so this isn't happening.
Right.
'Cause, they don't like to do real competitive, like, competing ideas. This was so similar. And then that next Emerald City, so was that about 8 months later, one of my editors, Mike Seglain, came up to me at Emerald City and asked me for me and Eric both, to come on to the comic adaptation. And we got to do some crazy stories with that. We've got, an Egghead story. Egghead from the 1960s Batman TV show makes his first real comic book appearance in our book. I'm not even sure if we were legally allowed to do that at the time because of the Fox rules. But the... what else did we do? We had a story where Batman and Adam Strange had to rewrite reality because it had been erased by the evil alien race of Scions, and they inadvertently created the concept of Christmas, secularly anyway, in the process. We got to do a lot of really insane stuff. It was a book that at the time, when Eric and I were the primary people working on it, that Grant Morrison in a panel at San Diego said was the best book at DC Comics.
So after you died, when hearing that, what was it like being resurrected?
Well, here's the thing, because I again, being older, I've never met Grant personally exactly. I enjoyed his Doom Patrol stuff, but I mostly know him from when he did a signing here in San Francisco, and Eric and myself and another friend of ours, Dylan Williams, we crashed this signing. We crashed this party.
Mm-hmm.
Because there was a lot of really good free food there.
Okay. A great motivator.
Grant came in wearing this hat in the hat, top hat, and giant glasses. And I cannot... This is an aside. I'm going on a complete aside here.
Totally fine.
So he was in complete raver gear. This is like 1991 or 2 or 3 or something like that in San Francisco. And at this bar where there was a boat in the middle of the lake. It was weird. Anyway, he shows up there. So every time we see these, like, we drive to LA, there are these giant water towers that are Cat in the Hat stripe painted. Mm-hmm. It's Grant Morrison's head underground in our imagination. That is awesome. Like my vision. And that's kind of my locked-in mindset of Grant Morrison, is that guy I briefly saw at this party I crashed 30 years ago or whatever. Right. So I didn't really think much about it, like, oh, the Cat in the Hat guy. A bit of a tainted perspective there. Mm-hmm. I like his work, though. He's good.
Awesome.
People seem to like him. He's going to go far, I think, if he sticks with this.
This little thing that he has been doing for a couple of years. Yeah,
Yeah.
He can go places. So with those younger centric, those all ages style books, was that something that when you first got into the industry that you wanted to do? Is that something that just kind of came organically? Where did it come from? Oh man, I have a specific answer to that. Okay, nice. So again, with Eric Jones, we started doing underground comics in like 1991, 92. We're doing some really terribly executed, insane books that involved a lot of murder and sex and drugs and things like that weren't family friendly at all. And that was, we were part of a Bay Area comics collective. We lived in Berkeley. We were doing comics in Berkeley with a lot of, we were working this small press distributor called Puppy Toss. And we distributed books by Dan Clowes, Adrian Tomine, all these people they were local at the time, mini comics, and we got tired over the next
5 years or so, we were doing these and going to conventions, and you have a constant barrage of kids coming up to your table trying to look at it. It's like they know the thing they're not supposed to see, and they want to look specifically at that. And I got tired of slapping down the cover of the book going, no, don't open that. No, that's bad. And it just
and the glares from the parents, I'm sure, you know.
Oh, yeah. Well, there becomes a point where you get... There's something I learned a long time ago about if you have to swear in dialogue to make your point, then you're not working very hard at your dialogue. You need to be able to make your point in dialogue without having to resort to swearing. Now, that principle can apply to this visual presentation and storytelling in general. You need to be able to tell the story without relying on the more bombastic, eye-grabbing tricks of extremist graphic moments. And so we made the decision to start doing all ages work because we were tired of not being able to share our work with kids. We were tired of that aspect of it. And also it felt like it was a dead end creatively. So we switched to doing, we launched a book called Little Gloomy.
Right.
Which was a series of a universe of monsters and one girl who wasn't a monster living amongst them. And that's actually a cartoon series now called Scary Larry that airs like Saturday mornings. We had a long, strange trip with that one. We did that, and the funny thing is we were handing out mini comics of this at San Diego, and we happened to hand one to this guy, Steve Bailing, who was the brand new editor of Disney Adventures magazine at the time. And so he's like, "Do you want to do comics for me?" So we actually got to do.
First of all, what comic writer, author, colorist, whatever? If somebody's like, "Hey, want to write comics for me?" Like, how quickly did you have to say yes? Yeah.
Yeah, well, especially when you consider we'd been in the industry for 8 or 9 years at that point, and we had made maybe a total of $800.
Right.
So, we were doing a music comic strip as well at the time. We were doing a lot of different things, so that became our new focus. We worked on Disney Adventures for 7 years, doing Little Gloomy comics. We also had a series in Disney Adventures called Kid Gravity. We did a lot of things with... Those were both creator-owned, which was interesting. Disney was publishing all ages creator-owned comics. They were available in grocery stores across the world. We had a distribution of millions, and the comics industry paid no attention to it. The comics industry was like, if only we could get comics in the hands of kids. It's like, we're doing it.
Right.
We'd go to conventions, we'd see people like, man, you really dropped off the map. I'm like, our work is being sold. We are outselling the top people in comics at this point. We're reaching more people, more impressionable people than anyone in comics at this point. We did that for 7 years. There's not a single panel I think I've been on in the last 5 years that hasn't been, we're talking about, and somebody goes, "Oh my God, you're the guys who did that?" Like, because they're all those kids have grown up now.
That is awesome.
So, it's an interesting, it was an interesting process. We really enjoyed it. And then in 2007, Disney Adventures shut down. Just an editorial change, not editorial, a CEO change at Disney, and they shut it down. It was really awful for a lot of people, and that's when we launched Supergirl Cosmic Adventures at DC, which we mentioned, and then to Batman Brave and the Bold, and then we went and did a non-all ages series called Danger Club, which was really just a commentary on why all ages comics are better.
See, I was going to ask you about that because following some of your work, and yeah, it was a lot of all ages stuff. And then when Danger Club came out, it was like 2014, around then.
Oh, I think it started in 2012, 11, and then ended in 2015.
Okay. Yeah, so when I first started kind of seeing that, it was around, that 2014. And then when I was doing research, I was like, this is from the same person who's doing all ages, because Danger Club definitely, maybe not goes back to your, underground roots, but it was a stark departure from what you had been working on in recent years.
Yeah.
So kind of, and that was obviously intentional. It was your way of kind of going about it and talking about those all ages books in a different context.
Yes. The entire thing, it's a deconstructionist sort of look at the superhero industry. about, the story basically being all these teen sidekicks are left alone to their own devices. It becomes a very Lord of the Flies situation.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire thing is a commentary on how comics, where comics were, is idyllic, heroic, idealistic sort of universe into this depressing kind of almost post-apocalyptic sort of worldview of violence. And these characters are aware of what they've lost. They've essentially been rebooted, and they're trying to fight the reboot and go back to what they were.
Right.
As I said, the entire thing is a commentary on the evolution of comics and how we've kind of lost our way. The audience is not... there are wonderful comics coming out. I have to preface this saying there are brilliant comics coming out that you have to look at and go, this is fantastic. What should it be? I'm going to use a non-comics analogy. Did you see the Nolan Batman films?
I mean, is that even a question? Come on now.
Okay.
Yes, of course I have.
Right. All right. Fair enough. Okay. So the second one, I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was the perfect, with the Joker, I thought it was the perfect Batman film. I'm the guy who was, who met Burt Ward when he was 5. I thought it was brilliant. But I wouldn't take a 5-year-old to it.
Yeah.
The Joker swishing his razor blades around his mouth, or the line about it. He doesn't literally do it, but a lot of the scenes in there, that's great. But I was like 40 when that came out, or something, 38 or something. I shouldn't be the target audience for this material. I'm glad I am on a purely selfish level.
Of course.
But this is material, if we want to see it continue to thrive and continue to exist and continue to hold the level it's been, we need to cater it to children. It needs to be stuff we can hand to kids, stuff that kids can digest and read and learn to love and follow along the same path the rest of us have been on, so that there are comics 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 40 years from now, in whatever form those exist in.
And I think that, and that is a really good point that, as a comic book kid growing up, yes, as I get older, it is cool to see those other representations, the darker Frank Miller style. But at the same time, it is, I totally understand what you're saying. That you are isolating the audience that you once were, and by you, I mean the creators of this, reading the comics, being like, this is amazing. And then they get older, their vision changes as to what those characters are, without kind of maintaining some of that essence of where they started from, which is why I thought that shows like Justice League, the animated series.
Oh,
Justice League. Those shows were incredible. And there are generation that grew up with that, which is why when we got a Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern, a lot of those people at the time, a lot of the kids reading it and the teenagers, that was not their Green Lantern. Their Green Lantern had been Jon Stewart in the animated series since 2001.
I'm never going to understand why they didn't go with Jon Stewart. It was primed for Jon Stewart. I really